Okay, let me ask Mrs. Makinde. When did you have a 6-year-old daughter? I saw her, pretty girl, you know. When did you notice that she had Down syndrome?
Thank you very much for having me on the show today. The doctors told us 5 days after she was born.
Were you still in the hospital, or had you been discharged?
I was still in the hospital.
Okay.
So 5 days after she was born, the news came she had Down syndrome, and that broke my heart.
Okay, let's talk about some of the challenges you faced, you know, thereafter when you left the hospital. What did you find? Is she your first?
No, she's my third.
Okay, which means you have an experience of, you know, what it means to be like a normal mother. So what were the different things about her that you probably didn't face with the others?
At birth, during her delivery, she had birth asphyxia. She didn't cry. And I knew the doctors were kind of like struggling to get her to cry. That was kind of strange to me. And I noticed as well that I couldn't breastfeed her the first 48 hours.
Okay, you had a problem with her suckling?
No, they took her away because she didn't cry. I think it has to do with the birth asphyxia.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think she was...
They told you that big word?
No, they didn't. I later discovered what it was. So they took her away, and I realized that there was a problem, you know. So, but when they brought her back and I was able to breastfeed her, I also noticed she doesn't cry for food. She doesn't wake up to cry like my other kids usually do. And she was almost like not perturbed. She won't even bother if you don't feed her. She was floppy. She had this slanted eyes. Even though the doctors were talking about the features she just mentioned, but I didn't want to see them. Then I realized I started having bad dreams. Oh, I started crying. I was so devastated. Like 7 days after, it was just not me, and I came down with a high blood pressure. But one thing I realized was as she grew, like when she was 1 month, 2 months, I noticed she didn't have neck stability. So because I had been exposed to a child with Down syndrome before I had her, I just told myself it's okay to cry. I needed to begin to do all I had to do to help her.
So
with
we'll
early
come
intervention.
a bit later to the kind of things that you did. But doctor, I want to know, does this disability extend to behavior in the children? Do they have behavioral problems, disruptive behavior, for example?
There are other, as I said initially, comorbid symptoms that could occur with a child with Down syndrome. Apart from the Down syndrome itself, they could have other mental disorders. All right, the more common ones would be autism spectrum disorder. All right, they could have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They could have other.
Isn't it too big to have two of those things together in one person?
Unfortunately, it could happen. It does happen. But may I quickly say that most kids with Down syndrome, about almost half of them would have a congenital heart disease.
Okay.
So if your child has ever been diagnosed with Down syndrome, you must get an echo, or your physician must make sure that, because that is treatable, we can correct those congenital malformation, and that also will prolong the life of the child.
Okay. So let's come to risk factors. What would be the likely, you know, helpers along the way to such a condition? Why would it occur?
Okay. All right. First, we don't know the cause, but we know that there are risk factors. Okay. Now, in the total population, just as you mentioned earlier, 1 in 700 live births would have Down syndrome. Okay. Now, the risk increases with maternal age.
Okay.
All right. So, if, for instance, a person who is 25 years old gets pregnant now, okay, there is a 1 in 1,250 chance of live birth in a woman aged 25 of having a child with Down syndrome. Okay, and the risk increases. So if you're 35, you have a 1 in 400 live birth.
That has increased so much.
Yes. All right. Now, 45, it's about 100. So for every, but look at it, the larger number of children with Down syndrome are from mothers that are less than 35 years old.
Yes, so it doesn't really follow, you know.
And the reason is, by the time you're 35, most of women are done with childbearing. So the incidence of having it is less. But there is a higher risk if you're over 35 that you could have a child with Down syndrome.
Okay. All right. So when children are born, there are lots of vaccinations. In fact, even the mom goes through vaccinations and all that kind of thing. Couldn't some of these things reduce the risk? Like maybe folic acid that they take when the women are pregnant, antenatal care. Does it help in any way?
In pregnancy, right, taking folic acid helps to reduce the incidence of neural tube defects. Okay. That has to do with brain development and all that. All right, but there are screening tests that can be done in to assess the risk of Down syndrome. Okay, not to prevent it, but to allow the mother to prepare them. Okay, there is a chance that this child may have Down syndrome.
Okay, let me ask, let me ask Tola, in what ways, by now you've left the hospital, you're at home, in what ways did having little Moyi, in what ways did having her change your lifestyle from what it used to be?
Wow. Well, my life is totally different from what it used to be. And I used to work in the bank. I'd worked 11 years in the bank before I had Moyi. And we got back home, and because of that diagnosis, I just realized that I was almost alone. Like, it's a lonely journey.
Okay.
It's so lonely. People sometimes would call her Chinese eyes. Then there was a lot of people, there were a lot of people that, usually come around me to say things like, oh, why is her head small?
Okay.
Why is she still wearing a cap? Is she not 8 months old? So I just reclined, I couldn't be everywhere like I would have loved to. I needed to focus on giving her the care she needed at that point in time in her life. So I can say that I used to be a workaholic mom and everything, but having Moyi diagnosed with Down syndrome made me a stay-at-home mom, trying to figure how do I cope with this condition. What can I do to give my child the best? I can't throw her away. She's a human being first. So at some point I had to tell myself that I needed to see my child as a beautiful child and not the diagnosis. I needed to see her achieve every other thing any child can achieve. So I started working on myself. I started saying positive things to her. And even when she wouldn't wake up to cry for food, and even when she had been diagnosed with a heart condition, I still chose to love her the same way. I did not live in denial for too long.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, this feeding problem when we come back from the break. But let's take a short break now. We'll be back in a very short while. Please stay with us.